My name is Daniel Kirsten. I'm the creator of the HydroTech Helper app, and this will be a quick walkthrough of the app, highlighting and explaining some of its features. A couple things to point out first. This is a web app, so it's accessible on any device with a web browser. It works well on phone, desktop, iPad, whatever you prefer to use. This walkthrough will be done on a desktop computer, but all the features work the same on other devices. Also, this app is built entirely on public data, so there's no login or passwords required. You do not need to be on a government device for this to work. So without further ado, let's get started. When you first fire up the app, you'll see this screen here. This is the Site Selection tab. And at the top, you'll see a box prompting you to enter a state. There's a drop-down menu that you can choose from, or you can just start typing in the name of the state and enter it that way. When you do that, you'll see another prompt asking you to select a site. There are three different ways to do this. The first is by typing in any part of the site's name and selecting it. You can also find a site using the site number by clicking on site number here. And the third way to do it is by selecting Choose on Map. A map will show up with all the active sites in that state, and you can click on a site there. When you select a site, a series of tabs will show up underneath here. For stage-only sites, there will be an overview and a time series tab. For discharge sites, there will be additional tabs for measurements, peaks, and stats. The Overview tab lists some general information about the site, such as location, site number, type, time zone, and the most recent measurement number and date. If you're getting ready to go out to a site, you can click this Copy Location to Clipboard button, then go over into Google Maps or whatever navigation app you use and paste it there. Underneath all that information, you will see a table of the most recent values for every parameter that's measured and published at the site. Below that, there's a map of the site. There's a few different base maps you can look at by checking or unchecking the boxes in the top right corner. You can also measure distances on the map using this tool here. The next tab is the Time Series tab. At the top, if gauge height is measured at the site, you will see the 90-day gauge height maximum. Below that, you can select any available parameter for the site and select the date range you would like to see going back 90 days. Sections highlighted in red indicate a jump in the data, which is usually the result of missed transmissions that didn't get filled in. Underneath the time series, you can click on this checkbox here to see the individual values for the parameter and time period that you selected. If you're out at a site that you recently fixed and are waiting for new values to come in, you can hit this refresh time series button here to have the app fetch the newest values. The next tab is the measurements tab. Here you will see all the measurement data for the whole history of the site in descending order by measurement number. Clicking on this Generate Prediction button will activate a machine learning function that will make a prediction of where a measurement should take place based on the current gauge height and prioritizing more recent measurements. Below this is a time series with each point representing a measurement, and you can view discharge values or gauge height values. The red dashed line is the current value for that parameter. The Peaks tab accesses peak data for the site and reports the highest peak in the record, along with a graph of all the peaks with the highest peak highlighted in red. Down here we have the same data in tabular form. The Stats tab provides some interesting statistical data about the site. The first graph shows yearly mean discharges for all the years the site has been active. The blue line is a trend line, and the red dashed line is the current instantaneous discharge value at the site. So you can see how it compares to those yearly averages. The second graph shows daily averages, averaged over all the years of the site. This also has a blue trend line and red dashed line indicating current value. Below this is daily averages for a specified water year. The next main tab is the Maintenance tab. The first sub-tab here is labeled Fix It. Here we have a map showing sites which are missing recent values. The parameters taken into account for this map are gauge height and depth to water below land surface. These sliders here can be used to filter results. The first slider changes the lower threshold for how many hours since a value was reported. The second slider changes the upper threshold for how many days since the most recent value. A table of these sites along with some information is displayed under the map. Here you can see the station name, number, hours since the last value hit the internet, the time of that reading, the battery voltage if battery is set to be published for that site, and which parameter it is looking for. You can also download this table if you'd like to have something that you can print out. The next tab in the maintenance section is the battery tracker. This will show a map of all the sites for which battery voltage is set to be published, colored by that voltage value. You can click on any of these sites to see the exact battery voltage. The next sub-tab is the flatline tracker. This one takes a little longer to load because it is retrieving 2 days of instantaneous values for every site in the state and looking through that data to see if there are any periods of flatlining. What is considered flatlining can be selected by manipulating this slider here. It is initially set to 12 hours, meaning that all sites which have had a flatline of at least 12 hours sometime in the last 2 days will show up in this table. Clicking on a row in the table will bring up a 30-day time series underneath with all the flatline periods highlighted in yellow. This gives you a sense of how normal or abnormal that flatline behavior might be at the site. The next main tab is the Values tab. Here you can select any parameter that's measured in the state and see a map of those values. By default, only recently reported values are shown. If you would like to include all sites, even those without recent values for that parameter, you can uncheck this checkbox here. Those sites will then appear with a red circle around them. A list of those not recent sites will also show up at the bottom under the map. If you would like to zoom into a specific site, you can start typing in the name of that site in this box here and select it. The next main tab is the High Water tab. We'll be going over to Florida for this one since they have more high water than Indiana does at the moment. The first sub-tab here is labeled Prioritization. What happens here is the app gets all of the measurement data for every discharge site in the state and then compares those measurements with the current discharge instantaneous value. It then counts the amount of measurements made which had a discharge value higher than the current value. If the current discharge at a site is, say, 100 CFS, it'll count the amount of measurements which had a measured discharge of more than 100 CFS. The sites which have 10 or less of these measurements will appear either yellow, red, or dark red on this map. Those sites will also appear in the table below, along with a lot of information about those sites, including current values, peak values for discharge and gauge height, and whether gauge height is currently rising, falling, or steady over the most recent hour of the data. Clicking on a row in this table will reveal a time series showing all the measurements over the history of the site, along with the dashed line again, indicating the current value for comparison. Below that are a couple peak comparison graphs showing how the current value compares to the highest recorded peak value for discharge and gauge height. The next sub-tab in this section is the National Weather Service Flooding tab. When you click on this, it accesses data from the National Weather Service and relates that data to USGS site names and numbers. You can see each site and its flood status. You can also click on any individual site to see the gauge height thresholds, which determine that flood status for that site. Now back to Indiana for the Planner tab. Say you are getting ready to go make some measurements and want some quick information about the sites before you leave. Here you can select those sites you are going to by typing part of the name into the box here and selecting it. Once you have a list of sites, you can hit the Generate Table button. A table will show up giving the site name, number, description, location, whether it is a discharge or stage site, the current gauge height, and if it is a discharge site, it will also give the predicted method of measurement and the next measurement number. There's also a map with the selected sites shown and labeled. You can download this table and map so that it can be printed out. The final tab is the Water Quality tab. Here we have a map of all the sites in the state that have water quality data for the selected water year. These sites can be filtered based on organization, characteristic, and project. So if, say, you only want sites with pH values, you can filter to just those sites. If you click on one of these sites, two tabs will show up beneath the map. One with info about the site and the other with all of the water quality data for that site. You can adjust this slider here to get more data from the collection history at the site. If you select a specific characteristic from the characteristic box, below the table you will also see a time series of that data colored by sample collection method. And that about wraps up the HydroTech Helper app in its current form. It's a work in progress, so some features may be added or changed in the future. And just as a reminder, this is currently not an official USGS product. I hope you enjoy the app, and thank you for taking the time to watch this video.